when I did the numbers, because this is just my last 6 months, it's a little over 150 primary ACLs. I did 97 quad tendons and 61 patellar tendons. So now my alternative graft is a patellar tendon graft, which I never thought I would say that. And actually, when my PAs got me those numbers, I was like, really? So anyway, the pictures are sort of how we do it. And you just saw that with diagrams and everything. And so this is a graft. And I guess the numbers show it that I've really grown to trust in a very athletic population. And so the second question was, well, why? How did I start this? And where I started, I really didn't like my choices in the physes open kids that were far enough along that you could do transphyseal tunnels. And so I wanted a graft that I could control size and I felt like was strong enough. So this is the first group I did. And I kind of told myself that this is the group that's going to fail. If this quad tendon stuff works, well, then maybe the failure rate in this group will go down because they're in my hands, the group that's most likely to fail. And so I watched these kids for a while. I presented it at the ACL study group last year. They were pretty incredible, jumping out of the gym and breaking all the rules and doing what they weren't supposed to. So that really gave me some confidence in this graft. So why? Well, that's the X-ray on the left. The tibial tubercle apophysis is still open. They're too young to put bone across the physis, that kind of stuff. And so this graft really let me, I can harvest an 8, I can harvest a 7, I can harvest a 9, I can do what I want. That's why I transitioned and why I made the leap. And that was about 5 or 6 years ago, I think, that I started that. When we looked at everything compared to a matched control, age matched control of patellar tendon grafts as close as you could get, at 2 years out, there really wasn't any difference to speak of between those two grafts. I'm one of the big return to sport guys. That's something I would have loved to have seen in the repair talks today, is actually a return to play criteria and how the repairs look. When we looked at all of our return to play, quad strength, single leg hop, triple hops, crossover hops, 6 millimeter time hops, the whole deal. Basically, no difference between these quad tendon grafts and the PD quad tendons and the mature autografts. The re-injury rate at 2 years was 0, so we know that's not going to be the case. Now at 5 years out in this group, and we're just starting to write it, there's about 4 failures, and the numbers are way higher. So the failure rate, I'm very comfortable, is going to be the same as a patellar tendon graft. And if you look at 816 that we published, the failure rate for patellar tendons, if you control their experience and you take them to return to play and you're rigid about making them live up to it, is between 1% and 2% also. And I think that is what this is going to be with the quad tendon grafts. But, it's one thing for me to say this works for me, and it's a different thing. You have to control every variable, and we can talk about that later if you want to. But really, when you look at everything, the only difference was the return to very high-end sport was significantly different in the patellar tendon group. And I think the reason for that is I had a lot more in the patellar tendon group that did that. So this was a girl at age 12. She's age 13 right now, had a terrible left knee ACL with bucketed both menisci. This is about 9 months out. And so I just saw it, because if you trust that graft, she's testing it for you. This is a graft I just rescoped for SCAR. That's a quad tendon graft at 3 months. That's the MRI of it at 3 months. I inject ACL cells into all my grafts, and we can talk about that later. But, the healing of this graft and the appearance of this graft at 3 months, just to show, really appears to start to synovialize and looks great. What I like about the quad tendon graft is basically what I said. So it's a big biomechanically strong graft, and it's held up for me in an athletic population. And, I'm concerned about re-injury at 2 years and 5 years and that far out. And so I never celebrate in the recovery room, I guess is the way to say it. But I do think the re-injury rates are the same as BTB. It definitely helps me in the transphyseal group and the younger patients. I do think it has a role in revision surgery with failed patellar tendon grafts, when most of us in the athletic population would go to the opposite knee and take the other patellar tendon graft. I now have about 50 that have had quad tendons after failed patellar tendons for all over. I do not think there's a problem, because there's some wives' tales out there about that. I don't think there's a problem taking grafts from both sides of the extensor mechanism. Scary, and one of the reasons I didn't adopt it early on is I think the recovery of quadriceps strength is easier than it is with a patellar tendon graft. And if you poll all our therapists at Ironman, that they all agree they'd much rather take on a quad tendon graft than a patellar tendon graft in the first 2 or 3 weeks. And it's never too small, like some patellar tendons, because you can harvest the size you want. And there are some tricks, I think, that your therapists have to be used to dealing with these patients to get them jump-started and get them heading in the right direction. So that's probably, the best summary I can give for why and why not and where I am. But I will say, you can see from my numbers, it's getting harder and harder and harder for me to tell people to have a patellar tendon graft. And I find that odd in my world. But anyway, thank you for inviting me, and happy to answer questions later on.